And want to make a special welcome to anybody who might be here for the first time or might have joined us recently. So welcome. Before we get going today with our set, I just want to make a couple of announcements about some exciting upcoming opportunities with IJS to study and practice. One is we have a course coming up specifically for young adults taught by Kohena Kishira Halev Fife, one of our core faculty members, the four worlds of the Kabbalah. The four worlds concept is a really wonderful and powerful concept. And this is specifically, of course, one for something, an offering for folks in their 20s and 30s, special community. So there's an opportunity to do that. So if you are in that category or you know someone in your life you'd like to share that opportunity with, please do. Additionally, for everybody, we've recently opened registration for a new special course called Mindfulness for the Climate Crisis, taught by Rabbi Ora Nitkin-Kaner. And goes without saying, this is um, a condition of our lives these days. And so really, this is a wonderful opportunity to bring some special focus to specifically mindfulness practices for building resiliency and responding mindfully to the climate crisis. So that's coming up as well. And last but not least, our monthly mindfulness meditation sit for members of the LGBTQ plus community led by Aviva Chernik is tomorrow, this Wednesday, February 12th at 12 p.m. Eastern. You can sign up for free in the link there. So that's all of our preliminaries. We today are going to be led by one of our regular teachers who's often here on a Tuesday with me, Rabbi Susan Leider. Susan's going to offer a teaching and then lead us in a period of guided and silent meditation. Everyone will be muted. The chat function will be muted, and you won't be able to unmute during that time, so to minimize distractions. And then about the top of the hour, we'll have a chance as we wrap up the sit for those who are saying Mourner's Kaddish, remembering loved ones, to do so. You'll have a chance to do that if you wish, and then we invite you to stick around for a period of about 15 minutes at the top of the hour for Q&A and observations about your experience with the practice that Susan will teach. So Susan, so good to have you back as always. Welcome.
Thank you, Josh. Good to see everyone here today in this IJS community. So I want to bring to light today and lift up themes from our Torah portion for the week, Parshat Yitro. We just started the book of Exodus a short number of weeks ago, and we come upon this Torah portion that is one of the two places in the Torah where we read about the giving of the Ten Commandments. But the Torah portion itself is named after Moses's father-in-law. And so I want to, with a bow of gratitude to Shefa Gold, who I'll bring up one of her teachings in a little bit, start with a question in which she frames this Torah portion, which is, how do we prepare ourselves for the moment of redemption? Excuse me, the moment of revelation, which is redemptive, but it's revelation. So while this question is really framed in the Torah portion about how do we stand eventually at Sinai and receive the Torah, receive the mitzvot, these divine invitations that we have to engage with God, with the divine, with others. This can also be a question of how do we prepare ourselves for any moment of where we want to show up in the most present way possible that we can, in the fullest expression of our beings. So how do we find our way to Sinai? How do we find our way to any moment where revelation is going to be possible for us to access? So Yitro, Moses's father-in-law, pays a visit to Moses, and he comes to help Moses prepare for this Sinai moment. Yitro's kind of watching how Moses lives, watching how he tries to do everything himself, and yet Moses never has a minute to himself as leader because he's trying to do so much. So thank you to Rachel for holding our text space and sharing the text. And I'm going to be reading everything as I do out loud. So if you don't have access to the screen share, that's fine. Or you can look at it now or look at it later. So here's our verses from our portion. Moses' father-in-law said to him, the thing you're doing is not right. You're going to wear yourself out, and you're going to wear out these people too. For the task is too heavy for you. Ki chaved mimcha hadavar. You're not going to be able to do this alone, Yitro says. So this is pointed to the moment where Moses learns delegation, all these important lessons, and we're going to riff on that a little bit. So when he teaches Moses about delegation, the laws of empowerment, how to see leadership in others, he's saying to him, if you sit alone with the burden of truth, and eventually with Torah, by the way, right, in preparing to receive Torah, you are not going to be able to be the vessel that you need to be in order to receive revelation. Almost like the cup is going to be too full of everyone else's stuff, all the burdens that you're taking on from this community. Some of you know that I've been immersed in a study of the author Oliver Burkeman, who wrote a book called Meditation for Mortals. And when I thought about this idea of Moses's heavy load in our parsha today, I thought of this piece of wisdom that Oliver Burkeman shares from this book. So I'm going to read this out loud. He quotes a teaching from the late British Zen master Howwina Jiju Kennett. This Zen master was born Peggy Kennett, and she had a vivid way of capturing the sense of inner release that can come from grasping just how intractable our human limitations really are. Her teaching style, she liked to say, was to not lighten the burden of the student, but to make it so heavy that he or she or they would put it down. Metaphorically speaking, lightening someone's burden means encouraging them to believe that with sufficient effort, their struggles might be overcome, that they indeed might find a way to feel like they're doing enough, that they're competent enough, or that relationships are a piece of cake, and so on. Kennett's insight was that it can often be kinder and more effective to make their burden heavier, to help them see how totally irredeemable their situation is, thereby giving them permission to stop struggling. So again, I know this is an idea that might touch off a lot of different parts of us. What do you mean it's irredeemable? What do you mean I should stop struggling, right? But it's a very interesting idea of that. How many times in our lives have people come to us saying, well, if you just do this, it would lighten the burden. If you just did this, it would lighten the burden, right? But the reality is there are some burdens that are too heavy to carry alone. And the wisdom of this teacher in saying, I'm going to help you grapple with that truth. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to kind of say that things are going to get better maybe when they aren't, right? But maybe an entirely different strategy is needed here, that you need to put the burden down, right? It is heavy, right? It's not just a matter of fixing and adjusting small, in small increments, but that this burden needs to be put down. So on Monday, as is often the case, I found myself in the IJS online yoga class, which is such an amazing opportunity. If you haven't had a chance to experience that, I hope you will, with our teacher, Lizzie Shamash. And she shared this teaching of Rabbi Shefa Gold that I would like to lift up. I used some of this framing of Shefa's in the beginning, but now I'm going to quote her directly. Shefa says, I often say, my first practice is sanity. Sanity for me is the condition that allows for the full functioning of my body, feelings, thought, and awareness, which then allows me to be present for revelation. Sanity requires just the right balance of solitude and service, spaciousness and stimulation. If Yitro came to you in his wisdom and observed the course of your day, if he had a chance to watch how you balanced the requirements for wholeness, what might he say to you? Make a commitment to sanity and wholeness by taking Yitro's advice to heart. Be honest about your personal requirements for sanity. What must you do each day in order to stay whole and alert? Do an honest accounting of our minimum requirements for solitude, silence, wilderness, learning, music, dance, meditation, pleasure, beauty, nourishment, intimacy, rest, retreat time, whatever it is that is required in order to feel truly whole and fully alive. By making a commitment to your own wholeness, you send a clear message to God that you are available, that holiness is your priority. So thank you, Rachel, for sharing that. We can take the source sheet down now. So I find that Shefa's teaching integrated with this teaching that Oliver Berkman brings in his book of like, at what point is the burden too heavy and we need to set it down for our own sanity? And not only that, but we need to find the practices, the time, some thread of restoration for us, so that in Moses's case, he can be ready to be the vessel to receive revelation. And for us, it might be receiving revelation. It might be being able to show up, to be ready for service to others, to the world, in the way that we uniquely can be. But if we are schlepping that heavy burden around and just thinking it's going to get lighter if I just make this adjustment, that might be blocking us from being able to be the empty vessel that is needed to face the moment. So again, I want to thank Lizzie Shamash for bringing Shefa's beautiful teaching to me on Monday, to the IGS community, and I'm grateful to riff on it today. So our sit, this time together, these next 15 minutes of meditation and followed by Kaddish and discussion, this is our practice for many of us for sanity. This is readying ourselves, emptying ourselves, so that we can then go out and show up in the way that we need to in the world. So with gratitude for this moment, these minutes that we have together, we ground ourselves in our seats, on our back, feeling how the world supports us, the earth supports us, the structures under our body support us. And for just a moment, we set the burden down. We just set the burden down and turn to what is renewable, what is sustainable, what we feel under our hands, the gift of our breath, the gift of blood coursing through our body, the awareness of our consciousness. We go back into the well, dip into its waters for renewal in this community, in our solitude, yet in our being together. Whatever the anchor is through our body, through our breath, through a visual point, something we're seeing in our physical space. We invite this opportunity for an island of sanity to come into our bodies, into our beings, as we sit for the next 12 minutes or so. as we prepare to come back into this space and close our sit today, we look inside to be honest with ourselves about our personal requirements for sanity. What must we do each day in order to stay whole and alert? And by our making a commitment to our own wholeness, we send a clear message to the divine that we are available and that holiness is our priority.
You, Susan. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. We will continue with Mourner's Kaddish in a moment. And then on the other side of Kaddish, I'll invite you to stay around for some conversation and reflection about the teaching and the practice today. Rachel's going to put the text of the Kaddish on the screen. If you are remembering anybody today, you are welcome to include their name in the chat. And that great. Okay, we've got somebody's already chimed in there, and then you're also welcome to unmute your microphone, and you can join me in reciting the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal,
Buchdahl Buchdahl Shemi Rabbi
Alma Divrach V'Yutei V'Yamlich Makutei B'Chayechon V'Yomechon V'Chayei Dechol Beit Yisrael V'Agala
Uzman
Amen.
Amen.
Hey Shmei Rabba
Hey, Rabba Bara Leolam. Amen.
Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yispar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar
Adar
v'yitpar
Ilah
Shmei
Elam. Shmei
Kedusha
Kedusha Brichu.
Eila
Elam
Birchata v'shirata Mishpachata v'nechemata Ran
Iran
ba'alma
Yama
v'yamru
Vimru. Amen.
Hey Shlama Rabba
Rabba
Mishamayim
Shamayim
V'chaim Aleinu
V'chaim
v'al
Aleinu
Yisrael
V'Yachol
v'yimru amen.
Yisrael V'Yamru.
Oseh
Amen.
Shalom b'Marav
Shalom.
v'yaseh Shalom
Yes,
Aleinu v'al
Shalom.
Kol Yisrael v'al
Aleinu
Kol
V'Yachol
Yoshvei
Yisrael. Yakol Yoshvei Tevel. Amen. Amen.
Right. All right. Thank you so much. I just got a nice comment about my own podcast. Thank you very much. So Susan, welcome. We'll bring you back up here. Great. Thank you. If you have a question that you'd like to raise, I'm just our usual practice here is to just, if you can bold or not bold, all caps question, and then your question not in all caps, but that lets us just see it. If you, and otherwise feel welcome to make comments or observations or respond to folks in the chat. Always a lively conversation here in the IJS chat room. Or this isn't a chat room, the chat box of the Zoom room, right? That's where we are. Okay. Thank you for that. Really, it was such a beautiful teaching. Both the first part, and then the piece from Shefa Gold, and that's such a counterintuitive idea that you taught about when you have a burden. Don't necessarily try to ease it. Just actually allow it to be heavy and then set it down, right? Because life isn't necessarily easier. I'm really curious to hear for folks how that landed, because that is as you felt, Susan, like that. I could imagine that going in lots of different directions for folks. So I'm curious how that was. Um, and I'm curious if that's something you've been sort of trying, for yourself also, Susan, and how that lesson, that piece of Torah might be showing up in your own practice these days.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Josh, I think the piece that's hardest about the quote from Oliver Berkman's book is, once you get, you take in the image of the burden being too heavy and not instinctively trying to lighten it, but to do something else, is this section at the end where it says, to help them see how totally irredeemable their situation is, thereby giving them permission to stop struggling. And I think that that's really difficult for so many of us to accept, because we really want to believe that our situation, whatever that situation is, personal or otherwise, is redeemable. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And I kept through this in my own meditation, although I didn't guide in this particular way, but I was on my own journey. I was like picturing the burden at my feet. Like I was just kind of during my meditation, I was like, there it is. I just set it down. And there were several, right? Not surprisingly, but like, there it is. It's down there. And maybe the language here is needed is reframing, right? Instead of lightening, it's how can a burden, how can I completely recreate what that burden is? Because I don't think it's about giving up completely, but it is about not holding so tightly.
It feels related to like the second arrow teaching in Buddhism, right? That you're the first arrow, which is the pain and the suffering, and that's going to happen. Like that's not that you couldn't stop. But then there's the second arrow of the resistance that we might create around our suffering, right? And that is much more, sort of within our control. But I think it goes so much deeper. It's, I have a friend who he's someone I go to shul with, and is of a more conservative bent politically than me, and so we exchange views via email and in other ways. But he's also an incredible reader of Tanakh, of the Bible, and he really he challenged me recently with this notion of like, we have this sort of Western sensibility that it's fixable. We can fix it. Tikkun olam. We're going to fix it, right? And it might not be so fixable, right? There's an arrogance and a hubris, right, potentially involved in claiming like, yeah, we can fix all of this. Maybe that's not actually it. Like it really, like there's a deep rethinking that that could be invited there. And I think that's part of what I sensed in that teaching, to that the invitation, you know what? You may not, the irredeemableness of it's not in your power, right? So you can let go of that burden. The danger of that, of course, is like that could lead to totally disengaging and tuning out and not doing the part that we can do, right? It's such a fascinating conundrum. I think a lot of us are feeling that right now, about the enormous sense of overwhelm in the world and in the country, and what do we do with that? And there's a limited amount that any of us can do individually, et cetera, right? And Marion asked the question, but don't we have to try? That's a great question. And where does that come from for us? The notion we have to, it's so interesting, where ideas of obligation or responsibility come from for us. I'm not arguing one way or the other here. I'm allowing us to sort of play with that question for a moment.
Yeah, no, I think we do have to try, but I think what happens is, and someone raised the question above about ego, and I want to tie this in below to what Marion says about her question, but don't we have to try? Because Elan above says, what is the relationship, if any, between putting down the load and giving up the ego? Is I think sometimes the efforting and the trying is really wrapped up in that burden. And we're so knotted up, we're so tight, and we feel guilty if we put it down, right? We think, but maybe the purpose of putting it down is to regroup and to reframe or rethink what that burden is, what our role in that burden is, and what our impact can be, right? And I think, especially now, we're so busy carrying, like, being kotzer ruach, like short of breath and spirit because of that heavy load, that we then don't attend to our own sanity, which doesn't position us to have that empty vessel, right, of service that Shefa was talking about. We're not ready because we're too attached, I guess I would say, to that burden as it presents itself right now. Yeah, we can't check out, but we can set it down for a little bit and not feel guilty about that.
Yeah. A lot of good questions that are coming up here, right? Clearly. One I want to address, it actually just came directly to me, but I think, Roni, you meant to probably share this with everybody. For some people, won't this lead them to giving up in a negative way? For example, becoming very depressed, right? Even suicidal, possibly, right? That you could read it in, God forbid, right? You could read it in a way like, there's nothing I can do. My situation is totally irredeemable, and so I should just give up. And I don't think that's not. I want, Susan, I'll invite you to respond to that. Like,
Sure. So one of the, and I've mentioned this thinker before. I'll put it in the chat. Somebody I've been really shaped by is a thinker by the name, organizational writer by the name of Margaret Wheatley, who wrote a book called Who Do We Choose to Be? I'm putting this in the chat. And one of the things she points out, and I've taught this in relation to our perception of time in previous teachings here for IJS, is that we tend to think in a linear way that things are always going up, that it's always redeemable, and that things are always going to get better. But that is actually not in sync with what we see in history, where we see that things are much more cyclical, but they're much more, there's an ascent and there's a decline. There's an ebb, there's a flow, there's an inhale, there's an exhale, whatever you want it, right? And so there are many thinkers, she's not the only person who's pointed this out, that you can look through the course of history and you can see these periods of cyclical, incline and decline. But somehow we're in this mindset that things are always going to get better, that they're always going to ascend, that we're always going to eradicate injustice, poverty, inequality, whatever it is. But I think that's actually somewhat new to our period of history. I don't think our ancestors, even back into the medieval period, really had that same sense of like, oh yeah, we're just on this constant ascent upwards. So I don't think that Margaret Wheatley or I are here to have anybody become so depressed at being irredeemable that they can't see any light. She says, no, there's a lot of light to shine in a period of decline. There's a lot, she calls it showing up as a spiritual warrior. There's a lot of spiritual work to do, but it's not necessarily tied to everything getting better on this incredible ascent that we've come to crave and expect.
Yeah. I think that, I myself am just really starting to kind of unpack this for myself. It's coming up in my own thinking a lot these days is, student of Rabbi Yitz Greenberg that I am, who is very much, a progressive theory of history person, and there's a lot that would suggest that that's a very, very modern conception, a particularly American conception of history, and very recent, and current events don't seem to be reflecting that reality necessarily, and so there's a real invitation to do some rethinking about like what are some of those constructs that we might be holding on to. I'll speak for myself, that I might be holding on to, that I've constructed for myself that might be my own idols, right? That need to be let go of, or not discarded, not smashed, but just how much am I holding on to those things, right? And can we loosen our hold on that, right? And loosen their hold on us, and that gives us more of the more freedom. I was also thinking about the image from last week's parsha of Nachshon, well, the midrash on last week's parsha, but like getting to the point where you realize this whole thing is so like it's just not in my control, and it's up to my neck, and there's nothing I can do, and then the sea opens, right? There's a letting go that I think is symbolized and embodied in that. And I hear from I was talking to a colleague this morning, to Rabbi Miriam Margles, about work we've been doing with Jewish professionals and clergy around anti-Semitism and creating safe sort of spaces and environments for them to really talk about it. And for so many people, creating an environment where they can actually feel in their bodies, I can let my guard down, I can actually relax, I can actually be present, and I can feel something unlocking for me that I haven't felt in a long, long time. I think there's a letting, I mean, all of it, so much is just about, letting go. There's a letting go that's the basic move here, it seems.
Yeah, I think if Shefa were here with us, she would say that's what those sanity practices are. Is they're like mini letting go so that you can then re-enter, you can reframe, you can be emptied and come back to be of more, service.
Yeah.
You know, so many people said so many beautiful things in the chat about the Mishnah, about it's not upon me, to complete the work, right? All these things. So someone also says, has this question, can we lightly hold the knowledge that we cannot solve the problem and still perform acts of resistance, or just act as if healing and wholeness or redemption is possible? That is what Margaret Wheatley says being a spiritual warrior is figuring out where are those moments where you can show up and do that. And they're all over the place. Mm-hmm. They don't have to be linked to things getting solved or getting better systemically, but they're all over the place. Right. Ways for us to show up.
Right. And I think some of this is also, it's a function of democracy, right? It's also the fact that, and which is such a fairly new notion, right, for in human history, but the idea that all of us have a piece of the sovereign, right? Any of us who are citizens and who have that blessing, and are able to vote, right? We all have a piece of the sovereign power, very, very small piece, but a piece. And we have, elected representatives. And so like we feel, I think for a lot of Jews, we feel a lot of responsibility that comes with that, and a sense of power, but also being clear-eyed about what level of power comes with that, and how much responsibility to sense, and not to let ourselves off the hook, but also not to over judge ourselves for failing, for the failures. I mean, it's really, yes.
Because there's a sense of ego tied up in there too, right? A reckoning of like, and not to abscond the responsibility and choices we do have, but there's so many things that we don't have control over. Ricky put in the chat, it's still success to carry oneself with dignity into a fire, especially in the effort to save one another. It's not about it will get better. It's about what is the right way to live. And again, this echoes for me what Margaret Wheatley says, that sometimes, and it says it in our tradition too, right? That the reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah, right? It's like doing the right thing in a small space in the right moment. That's what it's about. There's also acts in larger spaces too, but there's plenty of things that we have choices about right in front of us.
Yeah. So much good stuff here to practice with, and such a good chat. I know a lot of people like to save the chat, so if you want to do that, 3 buttons at the top of at the top where it says daily meditation set, you can save the chat. And I'm going to go look up my Meg Wheatley. It's been a little while. So thank you for the reminder, Susan. And thank you everybody for being here and for practicing and learning with us today. We will be back tomorrow, same time, same channel. And until then, if you can't join us then, we hope you come back whenever. We'll be here, and we'll be here for you. And thank you again to Rachel for your help, your support on the tech side of things today. Thanks, everybody. Be well.
Take care.
Bye.